The morning I found out, I had 4 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, and one voicemail that changed everything. I didn't listen to it right away. It was a Tuesday, early September, and I was out in the backyard with my coffee, watching the sprinklers run on the back lawn the way I do every morning since I retired. 63 years old, a bad knee, and more time on my hands than I ever expected. That's what retirement looks like when you spend 40 years doing it right. I set the mug down on the patio table and hit play. Mr. Harmon, this is Deborah from Lakeside Title and Escrow. I'm calling regarding the partial disbursement request on the Cloverfield property sale. We've received the authorization form, but there are a few discrepancies we'd like to go over with you before we proceed. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. I stood there for a long moment. The sprinklers kept going. A robin landed on the fence post, looked at me, and flew away. Partial disbursement request. Authorization form. I hadn't signed anything. Let me back up because context matters here. My wife Louise passed 4 years ago this November. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 14 months. We'd been married 31 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in the family, going back 2 generations, and still found time to run half marathons at 55. Losing her was, well, I'm not going to spend this story talking about that. I'll just say it was the kind of loss that rewires you. Nothing looks the same afterward. We had 2 kids together. My son, Warren, is 38. He lives 20 minutes from me, works in HVAC sales, coaches his daughter's soccer team on weekends. Good man, solid. The kind of kid who shows up when things go wrong and doesn't make a production out of it. My daughter, Becca, is 34. She married a man named Todd 6 years ago, and I'll be honest with you, I never warmed to Todd. There was always something slippery about him. Not dishonest, exactly, or not in ways I could point to, just the kind of guy who always has an angle, always working something. He'd been between jobs 3 times in 6 years, always with a very smooth explanation for why it wasn't his fault. Becca took after Louise in some ways. Smart, funny, good with people. But she took after me in ways that weren't my best qualities. Stubborn, bad at asking for help. And she had a blind spot about Todd the size of a football field. About 2 years after Louise died, I made a decision. The house we'd raised the kids in, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, 3/4 of an acre in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. I decided to sell it. Too much space. Too many stairs for my knee, too many rooms that were just closed doors now. I found a nice condo in a 55-plus community about 12 miles away. Single floor, 2 bedrooms, a little porch that gets the morning sun. The Cloverfield house sold for $340,000. More than I expected, honestly. Good market, good timing. After paying off the remaining mortgage and closing costs, I walked away with just under $290,000 in net proceeds. Now, I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories go, and I don't want to be the villain of my own story. I set aside $60,000 in a joint savings account with Warren's name on it. Not a trust fund, just a joint account where he'd have access if something happened to me. He'd been there every step of the way when I was dealing with Louise's estate, the medical bills, the house upkeep. He never asked for anything. That account was my way of acknowledging that. I did not set up an equivalent account for Becca. I want to explain why, and I want to be fair about it. The year before I sold the house, I'd already given Becca and Todd $22,000. $12,000 to cover what they called a cash flow problem, while Todd was between jobs, and another $10,000 toward a down payment on a car after Becca's was totaled. Both times they said they'd pay it back. Neither time did they. When I brought it up, gently, once, Todd got defensive and Becca got quiet, and we didn't speak for 3 weeks. So no, I did not set up an equivalent account for Becca. I told myself I'd revisit it once things were more stable with them. That was my reasoning, and I stand by it, even knowing what I know now. The condo closing happened on a Thursday in August. I signed about 40 pages of documents, shook hands with the escrow officer, and drove to my new place with a box of kitchen things and a sense that I was starting something over, even at 63. That's not a bad feeling. Uncomfortable, but not bad. The proceeds from the Cloverfield sale were held in escrow for 3 business days, which is standard. On the following Monday, $289,400 was wired to my personal checking account at Fifth Third Bank. I confirmed the deposit, transferred most of it to a money market account, and that was that. Or so I thought. Back to that Tuesday morning. I called Deborah at Lakeside Title and Escrow at 8:47 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Harmon, thank you for calling back. I want to make sure we're on the same page before we process anything. We received a disbursement authorization form on Friday requesting that $47,500 be released from the escrow holdback on the Cloverfield property." I said, "I'm sorry, escrow holdback, the sale closed 3 weeks ago." "Yes, sir. There was a small holdback related to the septic inspection contingency, $2,500 held pending the county sign-off, which we received last week. But the form we received requested disbursement of $47,500, which exceeds the holdback amount. It appeared to include a request to draw from the proceeds transfer account. I didn't sign any form." Silence. "The form has your signature, Mr. Harmon." I sat down on the porch steps. The coffee was cold. The sprinklers had shut off. "Who submitted it?" I asked. "It was submitted by fax on Friday afternoon. The contact name on the cover sheet was Todd." I didn't need her to finish the sentence. Here's what I pieced together over the next few days. Between phone calls with Deborah, my real estate attorney, and eventually the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, Todd had somehow gotten a copy of my closing documents. I still don't know how, though I have a strong suspicion it happened during a visit to my house 2 months earlier when I'd stepped out for 20 minutes and left him in my home office. He'd used those documents, along with what appeared to be a forged signature, to request a disbursement from the escrow company. He was hoping that the confusion of a recent closing, combined with the small legitimate holdback, would create enough procedural noise that the request would process before anyone looked too closely. It didn't work because Deborah was good at her job. The amount was inconsistent with the holdback, and she made the call instead of processing it. But the attempt had been made. The signature was forged, and $47,500 was the number he'd tried to take. I didn't call Becca that day. I needed time to think, and I needed to be certain before I said anything. I called Warren that evening and told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, you have to report it." I knew he was right. I filed a report with the Franklin County Sheriff on Thursday. The escrow company cooperated fully and provided the fax records and the original document. My attorney got involved. Within about a week, we had a pretty clear picture. This was attempted wire fraud and forgery. Federal offenses potentially, depending on how the bank involvement shook out. And then I called my daughter. That conversation is the one I replay the most, not because of what she said, but because of what I could hear underneath it. She went through the stages fast. Denial first. There must be a mistake. Todd wouldn't do that. I must have misunderstood. Then confusion. Then a long silence. And then, very quietly, she said, "How much?" $47,500, I said. Another silence. "Did it go through?" "No," I said. "The escrow officer caught it." "Okay." Her voice was very small. "Okay." Her voice was very small. "Okay." I asked her if she knew anything about it. She said no. I believe her. I've thought about it a lot, and I believe her. But I also know that she'd been living with a man who could look her in the face every night and plot something like this, and she hadn't seen it. I don't blame her for that exactly, but it changed something in me. Todd's version, when Becca confronted him, was that he'd been planning to pay it back before I noticed. That it was a loan in his mind, that he'd been in a tight spot and just needed a bridge, and he was going to fix it. Becca relayed this to me. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, "Becca, he forged my signature on a legal document and attempted to steal $47,500 from a real estate escrow account. What he was planning to do with it afterward doesn't change what he did." She cried. I let her. And then I said something I'd been thinking about since I'd sat on those porch steps with the cold coffee. "I'm not dropping the report." She asked me to. More than once, over more than one phone call. Todd called me directly, which took a certain kind of nerve, I'll grant him. He was calm, almost friendly, walking me through his logic like we were discussing a misunderstanding about a dinner tab. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, "I'll see you in court," and I hung up. I want to pause here and tell you what was going through my head, because I don't want this to read like I was some cold machine dispensing justice. I wasn't. I was a 63-year-old man sitting in a condo that still smelled like fresh paint, surrounded by boxes I hadn't finished unpacking, thinking about how I'd spent 40 years building something and how this man had tried to take a piece of it like it was nothing. I thought about Louise, about how hard she'd worked alongside me, about how the Cloverfield house had been her idea back in 1989 when we were young and broke and she'd found it in a listings magazine and said, "That's the one." About the garden she planted in the backyard that I dug up and seeded over because I couldn't look at it after she was gone. I thought about Warren, who'd driven me to every appointment during that first year of grief without being asked, who'd fixed my gutters last October in the rain, who'd never once asked what was in any account or any will. And I thought about Becca, who I loved completely and who had made a choice years ago that led to this moment, and who was now going to live inside the consequences of that choice, whether she wanted to or not. I thought about all of that, and I did not drop the report. Here's what happened on the legal side. And I'm going to be straightforward about it, because I've seen how these stories go when people vague it up for drama. Todd was charged with forgery and attempted theft by deception under Ohio law. His attorney reached out about a plea. I talked to my attorney about it. In the end, Todd accepted a deal: 2 years of probation, mandatory restitution of $4,200 in legal and processing fees that my attorney documented, and a criminal record. No prison time. That part frustrated me. I'll be honest, but my attorney said pushing for incarceration would mean a longer process with less certain outcome, and at 63, I didn't have the appetite for it. What I did do was this. 2 weeks after the plea was entered, I sat down with my estate attorney and rewrote my will entirely. I did not cut Becca out. I want to say that clearly. She is my daughter, and I love her, but I restructured everything. Warren remained as executor. The joint account I'd set up for him stayed in place. The remainder of my estate, previously split equally, was restructured so that any inheritance Becca receives passes through a discretionary trust administered by my attorney, not accessible as a lump sum, not accessible to a spouse, dispersed only at the trustee's judgment for specific purposes like housing, medical expenses, or education for my grandchildren. I did not tell Becca or Todd that I'd done this. I'm telling you now. I also changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. It had listed Becca and Warren equally. It now lists Warren as primary, with Becca's portion going into the same discretionary trust structure. My attorney reviewed everything. It's airtight. Becca and I still talk. Not as often as before, and not as easy. She filed for divorce from Todd 4 months after the plea was entered. I didn't celebrate that exactly. I felt something closer to exhausted relief. Relief that she'd seen what I'd seen, exhaustion for what it cost her to get there. She's renting an apartment now in Worthington, about 8 miles from me. We have lunch sometimes on Sundays. She has never asked me about the will or the accounts. Maybe she assumes things are back to the way they were. Maybe she knows better and doesn't want to have the conversation. I don't bring it up. That's not because I'm hiding something. It's because the will is a private document and what I do with my estate is my business, and if there ever comes a time when it matters, the trustee will handle it the way I've instructed. What I will tell her when the time is right is the same thing I told Warren when I explained what I'd done. I told him that I'd spent a long time thinking about what it means to take care of people. Really take care of them, not just hand them things and hope it works out. Louise and I had argued about it a few times when the kids were teenagers. She thought I was too hard sometimes. I thought she was too easy. The truth, like it usually is, was somewhere between us. But I know this. The best thing I ever did for my kids was expect something from them. Show up when it matters. Keep your word. Treat what's yours and what's others with respect. Warren figured that out young. Becca is figuring it out now, the hard way, at 34. Todd, I suspect, hasn't figured it out yet. That's not my problem anymore. The porch at my condo gets the sun from about 7 until 10 in the morning. I'm out there most days with my coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. It's quieter than the old house, smaller. Some mornings it feels like loss, and some mornings it feels like loss, and some mornings it feels like exactly the right size. The morning I found out what Todd had tried to do, I sat on those front steps for a long time after I hung up with Deborah. And I made a decision, not the decision to file the report, though that came later. This one was simpler. I decided I was done being the kind of man who looks away from things because looking at them is uncomfortable. Louise never looked away from anything. I'd watched her face a terminal diagnosis with the same directness she brought to everything else. The garden, the kids, the arguments she and I had in the early years when we were still learning each other. She looked at things straight. I'm trying to do the same. The sprinklers come on every Tuesday and Friday at 7 a.m. I've got the timing set right now, and the lawn is finally looking the way I want it to. Small thing, but there's something to be said for getting the small things right, for tending what's yours, with the kind of consistency that doesn't need to be dramatic or loud. It just needs to keep showing up. I think about Deborah at the escrow office more than she'll ever know. She made one phone call instead of processing one form, and that small act of professional integrity, just doing her job right on an ordinary Tuesday, is the reason Todd didn't walk away with $47,500 of my life's work. That's how these things usually go. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a loud moment of justice. Just someone, somewhere, paying attention when it would have been easier not to. What Todd did wasn't spontaneous. He had been in my home office. He had seen the documents. He had gone home, made a plan, waited for the right window, and executed it. That takes a certain kind of intelligence, the kind that figures out systems and gaps and timing. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. He's not stupid. He just used everything he had in the wrong direction, for the wrong purpose, against someone who had never done anything to him but tried to welcome him into a family. That's what gets me when I sit with it quietly. Not the money. The money stayed where it was, and I've made peace with the legal outcome even if the sentence felt light. What gets me is the waste of it. A man smart enough to understand title insurance holdbacks and escrow disbursement windows, spending that intelligence on theft, building nothing, leaving nothing behind except a criminal record and a divorce, and 2 kids who are going to grow up knowing their father did something their grandfather had to report to the county sheriff. Warren never asked to be the executor of my estate. He never asked for the joint account, never pushed about the inheritance, never once positioned himself to receive anything. He just showed up, consistently, quietly, without keeping score. That kind of steadiness is its own form of intelligence, knowing what actually matters, and putting your energy there, year after year, even when no one's watching and there's no immediate reward. I didn't reward him for the optics of it. I rewarded him because reliability is real, and it's rare, and it compounds the same way money does. Becca is rebuilding. I watch her at Sunday lunches, the way she's slowly finding her footing again, making decisions on her own without running them past someone who always had an angle. It's painful to watch, the way growth usually is. But she's doing it with a kind of quiet determination that reminds me of her mother, the way Louise would set her jaw when something was hard and just keep moving. That's not nothing, that's the thing you can't give someone or take away from them. It has to be earned from the inside, one hard morning at a time. I'm not the man I was at 40. I'm softer in some ways, harder in others. I know better now what I'm willing to look away from, which is very little. I know what things are worth protecting and what things aren't worth the energy. I know that fairness doesn't mean equal, it means honest. And I know that the best thing I can still do for both my kids at 63 with a bad knee and a porch that gets good morning light is to keep being exactly who I say I am. The sprinklers still come on Tuesday and Friday at 7. Small thing. But I set the timer myself, and I know it's right and it keeps showing up.